I keep hearing you talk about the importance of being in the present.
Yep.
And that
Mhm.
this kind of work towards slowing down, really being embodied in the present, is, I don't know if it's a substrate of what you're teaching in the program.
Mhm.
I'm kind of interested in how that
Well, that
how it
really
works.
is woven through the whole program, because the program evolved over the last 13 years. Mainly, every time I found I wasn't effective, I was hitting my nose against the wall because they were working very hard, I'm working very hard, and I wasn't making headway. So every time I hit another gap in my education, and every time I hit a gap in, okay, this sounds very good, but how do you really apply it? And one of the things is that anybody that's been traumatized, it confuses that was then with this is now, which is certainly part of the Gestalt work and needs to be woven through the entire thing. The person has stopped being present as a result of the trauma, and you have to watch their breathing, you have to watch if their feet are planted on the floor, and you have to build within them the ability for them to observe themselves so that they can bring themselves back to that focus. So even if they're triggered, I can say that was then, this is now, and I can shift my perspective. And one of the things that I found is that when a person shifts their own perspective, there's no resistance, and there's a lot more healing that takes place and a lot more integration. And that's one of the central themes, I think, in Gestalt, is to teach people to become aware of their perceptions, their perspective.
You've worked with a wide variety of people, as you said,
Mhm.
lawyers, teachers, as well as therapists. So
Right.
this is interesting to me, and also for this new program, how it works with these people from different backgrounds that are coming into this training together.
Mhm.
How does that seem to work? And
Yeah.
do these other people, how is it for them to learn about attending to the body or expanding their awareness in this
Yeah.
new way?
It's a great question, because it's one of my favorite things, is that when I was trained only with therapists. And that's a very narrow perspective. So when you're in a class with immigration lawyers, and I had some policemen high up in the department of the Mexico City Police. And when I say policeman, it's not the person giving you a ticket on the beat, but they had formed a new department to have women who are part of domestic violence or sexual abuse come in, and of course coming into any police department, and coming into the Mexican police department, and as a woman. And so they really needed training. Immigration lawyers, they have to question their client to be able to help them legally, and the client can just become inconsolable at a certain point. Many people who interface with trauma have a lot to contribute to our own learning. So one of the things I like is that in that group, you're going to get a lot of different reactions that you may not think about when you're in your own private session with an individual patient in your room, but when you're in training and seeing the microcosm, the universe, it's much more exciting to learn. And one of the important things, as I found, is that so far I have never had anybody misuse the information or try to be a therapist when they weren't a therapist. But all the people that came from outside of the traditional mental health area, in quotes, were so grateful that they now had some tools and resources of their own. School teachers who realized that when there was a shooting at school, or one of the teachers, which happened in New York City recently, was beaten up in the classroom, that entire class is traumatized. This is a whole dynamic that the people relating to them need to understand.
It reminds me of how dangerous it is, or
Mhm.
can be, to live in this city, and how there are children
Yeah.
still, who whose ordinary lives are imbued, if not touched, by trauma.
And you have people come in and tell you, oh no, I don't have much trauma, and then they start telling you about their life. And for instance, if you constantly humiliate a child, that's worse than physical abuse, because the kid can't put his finger on it, but neurologically will have the same impact as if he was physically abused. Both here in the States and abroad, I'll have people say, well, that happens to everybody in my community, so it's not traumatic. That's their intellect, and that's part of the training, for you to realize that their intellect thinks that way, but their central nervous system was still traumatized. Their brain chemistry has changed. One of the things about the program is that the program is built so people will become a rather cohesive group going through the program to support each other. Because if you just learn about trauma from the intellectual, from here up, and how to apply some of those techniques or the techniques you're using, you're not going to be very good at it. And it's going to open up some of your trauma or some of your questions about yourself. So a lot of the teaching is also experiential. And within the confines of it, still a course, we're not going to be doing therapy with you, but we do help people to process what goes on so that they have an intellectual understanding and an emotional experience of all the concepts that go into understanding trauma.
And that would really be demonstrating, right, what you're going to be training people to do.
Absolutely.
You would be demonstrating it, because
Yeah.
it's not necessarily therapy that they're doing. And what I'm understanding, of course, is in this training, people are learning to be therapeutic.
I went to anybody I could find anywhere in the country that knew something about trauma, because what I knew was not sufficient. And then in the last 6 years, I just focused in, okay, from A to Z, what do you really need to know about trauma? And then, depending on your background, how can you, and with a hands-on approach, develop whatever you need to develop to become a healing agent with people who've been traumatized. Working people in the military are really concerned because while they may be trained in trauma techniques, they might be trained in sensory motor, they might be trained in EMDR, they might be trained in exposure therapy, they're not trained in how trauma affects the entire being, the Gestalt. And so they're working maybe with just the memory system. But trauma, even if you clear out some of the memory system, doesn't just spring back. One of the aspects of this training is for people to realize, and they will, I think, as they go through the training, the discovery that I made is that I worked with people, say, that were kidnapped or that had been torture victims. We fixed, in quotes, but we really healed the physical and the psychological, but they remained very flat because there was the loss of a belief of anything greater than themselves. So part of understanding the Gestalt is also understanding, I'll use the word, I know what it means for me, I can't say what it should mean for anyone else, but a sense of the spiritual, a sense of something more that makes us a human being that may have been infringed upon or pushed aside during the traumatic situation. This needs to be re-evolved. Sort of like we get squashed flat.
So you do that in the program, because I think, it seems to me that certainly for, ministers or rabbis or people who are, that's their arena, maybe thinking like that. But I think it's very true that anybody who comes in touch, whether it's a teacher who a student comes to or a therapist, we are faced with this kind of loss of a certain loss that needs to be met.
The word I'll use is that a person loses almost all their curiosity. They form a very tight, they don't consider it safe, but routine. They don't want to visit anything else but that routine. So if you can, once you rekindle a sense of humor, which is usually gone, once you start promoting a curiosity, which is a looking out into the world, because it's not totally dangerous.